I really love the way he framed this. The rules are made by people who don't play games. Amen to that. Now, he is referring to something else, and by he, I mean the creator of Resident Evil. But there are people in the West who tell others how to make video games. There are consultants that tell others, yeah, you need to have this in your video game, you need to remove this joke, you need to remove that scene, you need to add that pure, rich, Californian, manly jawline to your female character. And those people do not play video games, but for some bizarre reason, you have the studios listening into them. It's like talking to a person that has no interest in ships, teaching you how to build ships. And then you notice that the ships are sinking, and you don't know who to blame, and you're desperate, and you watch that the person you hire now works for another shipbuilder while you're out of a business. It's pretty much the situation in the United States. But in this particular case, he is talking about something else. He is talking about censorship in regards to systems that are similar to the ESRB. So the ESRB, from my knowledge in the United States, appeared because of Mortal Kombat, because that game was hyper-violent, and they said, alright, well, we do have free speech, we do have free expression, however, we want to make sure that kids are protected from violent scenes. So they separated games, and they separated various fictions, with certain characteristics in mind, right? So you have like fiction that is for everyone, and then you have like fiction that is for teenagers, and then you have like fiction that is for people that are over the age of 17, and finally you have like the really nasty adult hardcore stuff, whether it's extremely violent or just flat out pornography, which is 18 plus, right? Adult only, and a lot of platforms even refuse to touch that with a 10-foot pole. So that's in America, the ESRB system. In Japan, they have a different system. But what this person is talking about, the creator of Resident Evil, he is saying that the rules are different from countries to countries, and it's very difficult to create an interesting game now if you want to sell it everywhere. And this is absolutely true. I keep getting asked by some people, like, why can't we have games like we used to? Like, why can't we have another Manhunt? Why can't we have a Postal? Why can't we have more games like South Park that are incredibly edgy, that are pushing boundaries, that are absolutely hilarious? And the reasoning for this is the censorship. A lot of people don't understand that we don't live in the year 2010 anymore. Like, there have been so many regulations and so many laws that are cracking down on people's freedom of expression that's astonishing now. Like, if you want to write a book, if you want to be George R.R. Martin, you can put whatever you want in that book. You can write about literally whatever you want. And George R.R. Martin and Stephen King are renowned for writing about some really nasty shit in those books. Like, I'm telling you, like, incredibly nasty. Those who have read Song of Ice and Fire probably know who I'm talking about, especially scenes involving Ramsay Snow. Stephen King, it also has, like, disturbing scenes in it. But if you want to make a video game, well, you can't. You have, like, so much censorship. Like, for instance, if you have alcohol in it, it gets banned in certain countries. If you mention or imply the use of drugs in any way, even if it's like a detective story, and you're trying to catch a drug dealer, right? Like, even that is enough to, like, bump you up the ESRB scale. So, because games are expensive to make, unlike writing books, they have to make sure that they don't add those themes. Like, one of the reasons Capcom keeps saying, oh, it's herbal medicine, it's, you know, like this fighter is drinking herbal medicine and all of a sudden he becomes really good at fighting. It's alcohol, but they can't say it. So like, they're trying to use something else. They're using euphemisms in order to bypass the censorship. But what's really interesting, and I find it absolutely fascinating about the censorship, is the fact that it's different from country to country. Like, certain things that are offensive in Japan are not offensive at all in the United States, while certain things that are offensive in the United States are horrifying in Japan. So, in this situation, the creator of Resident Evil, he is basically saying that he doesn't like the fact that most of his games get an 18 plus in Japan. It's due to the violence, right? So it's due to the fact that Resident Evil is a game that's a horror game, and you do have violence. However, in America, most people don't care about the violence anymore. I mean, they used to. I remember back in the day, Fox News would constantly condemn video games like Doom, and they would condemn video games like GTA, saying like, oh, why would anyone want to play as a criminal? Like, what type of mindset do you want to have, like, the role of the criminal? Like, how do you justify that? How do you explain that? And the explanation was, well, it's fiction. But what if they don't accept that explanation? What if they say, well, no. Like, why would, even in fiction, why would you want to put yourself in the position of the criminal? Like, I understand games where you want to catch bad guys, but in GTA, you do play as the guy committing crime. Why would the sane person even want to have such a fantasy, right? So that was their concern at the time. They were also concerned about anime, like Dragon Ball, for instance. It wasn't the fan service that bothered them, but it was like scenes like Frieza impaling Krillin with a horn, and Krillin is puking blood, and it's incredibly grotesque. And they were very worried. It's like, why are young adults watching that? Like, they would know, okay, Dragon Ball Z, definitely not for kids. Like, everyone under 18 shouldn't watch it because it's incredibly gory. But why would even someone at 18, why would they be fascinated with that? What are they getting from? Like, what are they learning? What are they enriching themselves by seeing some violence, grotesque display, right? So that was the mindset when I was growing up. Like, whenever I would go on the internet and I would see what the Americans were talking about, it was the violence. Nowadays, Americans just don't care. Like, I have yet to see a single publication, whether on the right or the left, condemning, oh, this show is too violent, like The Boys. Oh, The Boys is too violent, or Invincible is incredibly violent, or the violence in Rick and Morty. Like, no one cares, right? As long as, like, small kids aren't watching, I assume that they would care then, right? Like, if you see, like, a 5-year-old kid watching The Boys TV show, I assume that even Americans would care. But, like, either than that, I've never heard or seen any American right now complaining that this show is particularly violent or it's particularly gory. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. Like, show me a publication that's either left-leaning or right-leaning, or even, you know, a conversation on Twitter that's getting some traction, where people would say, yeah, you know, like, this show is a little bit over the top. It's too much, right? So, the moral of the story is that violence really doesn't matter when it's coming to American shows. Like, in fact, the more the better. Has Been Hotel, for instance, right? It's a cartoon, but it has a lot of violence in it. No one cares. Now, in Japan, things are different, right? In Japan, too much violence, people start caring. Again, it's like, well, think of the children. We can't show this. It's way too violent. So if you have something very violent, they will insist that, no, like, this needs to be 18 plus. They treat it pretty much like pornography. It's like, it's not banned, it's not illegal, but it's restricted. So if you're creating this type of content, if you're making Resident Evil, if you're making horror games, if you're making stuff that's violent, then you're going to suffer financially. Because, you know, advertising for it is restricted, where you display it, how you display it, who you sell it to is restricted. So this is what Mr. Shinji Mikami is talking about. The opposite is true when it comes to sexuality. Right? So sexuality in Japan, if you have like an anime with schoolgirls, like, I don't know, what is popular right now? Oh yeah, My Hero Academia, right? So you have My Hero Academia and there is fan service. Like let's say a girl stumbles over and for one frame it shows her bikini. People in America freak out. I mean, people in America freaked out over the fact that in that show you had a beauty pageant and you had, like, this girl with big breasts showing cleavage, and immediately people on Twitter were freaking out, and they were demanding that the creator of the anime do better and be better, and, right? So they're very sensitive about these issues, and Western platforms as well, like Steam is very sensitive about all these issues. Like, a lot of games from Japan have to be censored in order to be displayed, even if they're not adult-only games, even if it's like a visual novel that's with a romantic one or anything like that, they gotta censor it for the Western audience. Meanwhile, in Japan, everything is fine, right? So, like, they don't really care about this if it's just for the comedy's sake, if it's not, like, actual pornography, if it's just, like, some lewd scenes, just like, something to create humor. They're not going to punish it really high on their version of the ESRB scale, right? So why is this important? Well, it's important because if you're creating a game for a general audience, if you're trying to sell something like Resident Evil, you gotta keep into account the Japanese censorship, and you gotta keep into account the American censorship. So basically, you have to censor anything that is fan service. So in the case of The Witcher, they have to censor the bath scene, they have to censor a lot of stuff, right? And you also have to censor the violence. And what it ends up is, like, with hyper-sanitized games that are very commercial, you know, over the shoulder type of shit, and you're shooting the zombies and you don't actually get to see the bullet wounds, you don't get to see the heads realistically popping, right? So like when people ask like why don't they make games like they used to back in 2010, well, it's because of the censorship in Japan, right? And if you're wondering, well, okay, but like why can't we see girls with big boobies and hypersexualized women and stuff? Well, it's because the censorship in America. So like both these censorships work together, if you will, to create some of the most sanitized products. Of course, every now and then you get an exception, which is why Resident Evil 2 Remake was really good and popular. But they are taking financial hits because they have to raise their ratings. They can't advertise anywhere. Which, to be fair, in a case like Resident Evil, you don't really need to advertise because it's a known brand, so word of mouth carries it. But if you're an upstarting game developer and you have like a small studio and you want to make something that's a hit and it requires that you invest a lot of money, especially if you're reaching for the investors to pay for you, well, you gotta maintain the censorship, right? And it's not just like, as I mentioned before, like in America, sure, you can make a hyper-violent game, but you can't do that in Japan. And in Japan, you can make a game that it would be filled with eye candy and it would be filled with fan service, but then you can't sell it on the American platforms. In fact, you can't even sell it on Sony. So this is what Mr. Shinji Mikami is talking about, and this is why the industry of video games have changed dramatically, and I don't expect that it's ever going to change back. In fact, I just think that as things move forward, we will see just more and more censorship, like less and less stuff that you are allowed to make into the games, which are causing games to become less of an art form and more just an assembly line product. It's like, these are the things you're allowed, these are the things you need to include, because if you want to get prizes, it's not really with games yet, but with movies, for instance, if you want to get an Oscar, well, you need to have like a certain quota of diversity, you need to have certain things that promote inclusivity, you need to have certain themes, right? So I assume that in the video gaming industry, soon it will be similar. So it's not just about like stuff that you're not allowed to add, but it's also stuff that you must add if you want your video game to win a certain award so that it garners more sales. But anyway, right, let me know what you guys think. And as usual, I will see you in the comment section. Take care.